You've probably heard quite a bit about the Utils project through its usage on Ubuntu Linux. If not, Utils is basically a rewrite of the GNU core utils, along with a bunch of other things. Whilst the core utils is the main thing it's known for, there is a bunch of others. We have the find utils, the diff utils, there's a sed rewrite, a grep rewrite, the awk rewrite, which is a very new recent thing, there's a tar rewrite, we have this util Linux here, we have BSD utils, and there's probably going to be a bunch of things over the years as well. Basically, it is the set of tools needed to do a clean install of Debian, minus some things like, systemd, apt, the Linux kernel, various other things which, the developer is not insane enough to tackle. Now, back in March of 2025, it was announced, carefully but purposefully, oxidizing Ubuntu. Ubuntu was going to be swapping to Utils in the next version, which at the time technically would have been 25.04, but they were past the window for that, so 25.10. Along with Utils, they were also going to be making use of sudo rs. This is an unrelated project, but is often bundled together because they're both Rust projects and all this good stuff. Sudo rs is a very different kind of thing from what Utils is trying to be. Utils wants to be a rewrite of these GNU tools, of these basic tools we have, of the same functionality, but written in Rust with general improvements. They don't change the workflow, but do change the quality of the software, one might say, and making some improvements where they don't necessarily change the workflow, but do make things better, like having better error reporting and things of that nature. Sudo rs isn't trying to be sudo. Sudo does a lot of things which the average user, even experienced systems administrators, just frankly don't need, so it's a much more stripped down version. Honestly, I'm not fully certain on sudo rs. When it comes to Utils though, there has been a couple of very serious and very notable problems. For example, a bug with date, which basically broke updating in Ubuntu. And there was maybe like 2 or 3 other of these, which were really big, really notable, that everybody kinda heard about. There was an update more recently, this was back in April, talking about the general state of actually doing this oxidization. In this, it was noted that even though they are using Utils, there are still issues with some of the tools, and they actually are still using the CP, MV, and RM provided by GNU Core Utils, even though the rest of it is Utils. This is due to some open issues at the time, which at least as of April had not been resolved. I'm gonna say all of these have probably been dealt with. Now, there might be some, obviously, new, different issues, but yeah, all the ones they had at that point, those are all dealt with now. Plus, there were quite a few disclosed CVEs. Actually, quite a lot of them. How serious were some of these? Some of them are rated high, some of them are medium. How serious they actually are in the real world, though, a whole nother matter entirely. But as you'll notice, all of those problems are being dealt with at a relatively rapid pace. This project is dealing with problems basically as they're being reported. You don't tend to see things which stay open for multiple years unless it's something where it's like, hey, we just haven't even touched working on that tool entirely. Obviously, Utils is very far from perfect. There is a reason why it's not shipping on every single distro. There is a reason why Ubuntu is still giving you the option to easily swap back if you don't want to use it, and there is a reason why, at least at the time of writing that article, that certain tools were not yet being used. However, outside of people just complaining about the existence of this project, you don't really hear much now about technical complaints. Yes, you get the, one-off major problem, but it's not like you're hearing, oh, this thing doesn't work, that thing doesn't work, I'm abandoning Ubuntu, and just, a mass exodus of Ubuntu, because this set of tools just is fundamentally broken at this point, because it's frankly not. It's actually in quite a good state. Now, yes, There are obviously still quite a lot of open issues. A lot of these, though, are more of the, edge case stuff that most people are not going to run into on just your average, everyday basis. At this point, we have a 93.3% pass rate on the test suite, with these points where it actually goes up. If we look at right here, the point where the fail rate went up, it went up because more tests were being added, right? It didn't go up because it suddenly got worse. It went up because there were undocumented assumptions in the project that have now been documented, and they weren't yet working in Utils. If these tools were so terrible, so unusable, there would be the general recommendation of swapping from Utils back to the GNU Core Utils, but for most people, even just industry people, they're using it fairly transparently without even really thinking about the fact that they're not using the GNU implementation. Yes, in certain specialized workloads where you have a script which hasn't changed in 30 years and relies on some weird undocumented bug that nobody even realizes in the project, sure, in that case, you're gonna have some problems. But that's not most people. And in fact, a lot more people than you might think are actually using Utils. I was under the assumption that Ubuntu's adoption was kind of like the early adoption of this toolset. Yeah, it'd been packaged in places. Yeah, it was available if you wanted to use it, but not really in a state where, it was the thing that was there. This is the expected thing you're going to use. This is the default. First, they want to highlight Snap Inc. Yes, that same Snap that makes Snapchat. They also have an operating system called Snap OS. This is a proprietary Linux-based operating system powering the Specs augmented reality glasses. If you want to go have a look at those, they look a little bit goofy, but they are powered by Linux, and they are glasses, and you can pre-order them now. And on those glasses, well, they're running a project built off of Yocto, and that project is making use of Utils. A Snap engineer has been the primary contributor and maintainer of the Utils core Utils recipe in the Meta Open Embedded Meta-OE layer since Yocto 4.1 Langdale. The recipe uses provides equals core Utils, so Utils acts as a transparent drop-in replacement for GNU core Utils in embedded images. And with this being a part of Yocto, even though it's being maintained by a Snap engineer, it's very possible and very likely that random other embedded projects, which we don't know about, nobody ever discusses, are also making use of this as well. Because Yocto's not a small project. This is one of those foundational pillar projects in the embedded space. As we can see from this person right here, Snapchat.com. Whilst it is pretty much confirmed that Snap is making use of Utils, it's not just on Yocto. It's also been packaged on Alpine, and Alpine is used in all manner of different places. It's packaged on Debian, and when things are proprietary, when things are not open sourcing what they're doing, it's unclear exactly what is going on. So who knows how many projects are actually doing it. But we also know that Buildroot also makes use, which is another widely popular embedded Linux build system, ships an official Utils core Utils package since April of 2025. This brings Utils into the reaches of a vast ecosystem of IoT, industrial, and embedded devices built with Buildroot. And you're probably never going to know the majority of projects that are using this then. This is the thing about building something that is going to be used by, in many cases, proprietary consumers. Unless there is a leak, unless someone digs deep into the system or they find a way to root the device, you oftentimes have absolutely no idea what it's actually using behind the scenes. Based on conversations I've had though, it is very likely more than just Snap. It's just the way you usually find out is when an engineer with an email attached to that company goes and contributes a patch. Like that's pretty much the best reporting process you actually have. On a much smaller scale, on something we actually do know about, we have Apertus. Apertus builds the Axiom Beta, an open source professional cinema camera. Their firmware build system runs on Ubuntu host and was updated in December 2025 to support Utils core Utils as the host toolchain. This makes Apertus one of the first hardware projects to explicitly track and maintain Utils compatibility in their build system. Now, yes, it is just their build system. Yes, that's not that big of a deal, but it's still cool nonetheless. Moving back to a much, much larger scale, we have Microsoft. Ooh. Microsoft ships Utils core Utils as core Utils for Windows, a native Windows distribution of Utils core Utils, Utils find Utils, and a Microsoft fork of Utils grep. It was announced at Microsoft Build 2026, June 2nd, 2026, as part of Windows becoming a first-class development platform. How often have I heard that one before? Windows is becoming first-class development platform. Windows is becoming first-class development platform. They've certainly said it before, and they haven't really achieved it, but, you know, best of luck. This is available today. You can get it through Winget if that is what you like to do. The stated goal is to make the move between Linux, macOS, WSL, containers, and Windows frictionless. The same commands, flags, and pipelines work the same way, so existing scripts carry over without translation. See, this is a nice thing about Microsoft not being, like, the dominant platform. They have to play nice with open standards. They have to play nice with what other platforms are doing. They don't just get to, like, push companies around, because we know what happens when Microsoft is the dominant company. That's how you get IE6, which was certainly a experience for anyone who had to deal with it at the time. Just in case you weren't there, it was very common for certain websites to only be able to work with IE6. You could only log in with IE6. Not that, oh, it might work weirdly, Chrome and Firefox do things slightly different. No. IE6 did things in such a stupid way that it would only work in IE6. Microsoft maintains the downstream packaging at github.com/Microsoft/core-utils. The Utils/core-utils project is the upstream. Microsoft builds from it directly and does not rewrite the tool. So this is their repo, and that's pretty much it. They make some very minor changes to it, but for the most part, it is literally just the project. Throughout all of this, you might be wondering, why? Why even bother? When we're looking at the embedded space, developers have complete control on how these tools are going to be used. Outside of obviously the device being rooted and people doing things that were not intended by the original developers of the device, they know what is being run, right? Like, they have complete control over that system. So, in cases where there are still issues or where there are features missing, you don't have to worry about that if you don't use those features. As long as the performance is there, as long as they are light enough, and from some of the testing that's out there, in many workloads, they're actually faster than the GNU implementation. Yes, there are certain things where it's been really bad, like you have 2 million copies of the letter A, and then it like takes 10 times as long to deal with it. But outside a case like that, which that specific case has been dealt with, it's actually running faster. And running in an embedded environment where you control everything you're running actually makes that a much easier problem to deal with than making something that you don't know how users are going to interact with it. Something running on a general distro, that has a lot more ways it can break. Then there is the matter of the license. So, this has been a big topic of discussion. GNU core utils are licensed under GPL v3 or later. At one point, it was GPL v2 or later. Eventually, they changed it. And Utils is an MIT project. It was originally MIT when the developer adopted it. Sylvester didn't actually start the project. He picked up a project that was already going on. This has been a cause for a great argument amongst people who don't like the project. The developer's stance on this is basically that it doesn't really matter to him because there's no money in an implementation of core utils. Like, if somebody was to take that proprietary, what are they getting out of it? Like, why even bother, right? If somebody wants a proprietary implementation of the core utils, like, they can do it, but, like, why? Everything is built around what we're doing in the Linux world, so, like, why? Much like the BSD stance, his stance on software is basically he wants to get it out there to as many people as possible, help as many people as possible. The sort of, strict adherence to the four freedoms, GPL, free software, that kind of side of the Linux movement isn't really his focus. Whilst the concept of a permissively licensed implementation of Unix utils is not exactly a new thing, there have been implementations in the past, it is kind of new to have an implementation of the GNU core utils in a permissive way. And with these being the standard on Linux, it was then a perfect choice for any of these companies that want to make use of this, who don't want to then have to deal with the complexities of dealing with the GPL. Now, I would like them to deal with the complexities of the GPL, but I also understand it from their perspective of why they don't want to. And then when it comes to the Microsoft usage, it is just a matter of easier porting, right? Like, this is also why it wouldn't make any sense to make a custom proprietary version. Now, somewhere down the line, if they do achieve their goal of making this the first-class development platform, and then, adding in some little things that make it so things don't easily port, sure, okay, maybe somewhere down the line that would happen. But at least initially, that's not where we are right now. And this is kind of the whole point of like WSL as well, right? Where they know that people want to use Linux. They know that developers are wanting to use this platform. They can't just convince people to use it by locking them into a platform that they weren't using in the first place, right? Like that doesn't logically follow. You got to do the locking once you actually have the people. But ever since things like the Halloween documents, there has been a lot of changes in the development space. A lot more companies are realizing that working in the open source space is actually valuable, if for nothing else besides the fact that they don't have to pay you. Right? A lot of companies realize, hey, there's actually a lot of really talented developers who are more than happy to volunteer on our corporate project. So why don't we just let them? And if then something is open, more people are willing to report bugs to it. It's kind of just like a win-win. And you're seeing a lot of companies who traditionally did things in a very proprietary way just saying, you know what? Hey, if you want to give us free labor, go right ahead. So I hope you learned something. Whilst you may not like the project, whilst you may not want to use the project yourself, Utils actually has a lot more usage than you might think. It is not just a thing that Ubuntu is doing and nobody else. This is seeing usage in other places, and even if it doesn't become like the main thing on Linux, it is seeming to be this thing that gets used in the background, gets used as like cross-platform solution, and I'm curious to see where that ends up going. So, let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, go hype the video if you're on mobile, and if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Silly Therapy, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and show me your oxide.